Everyone. Welcome to week 2 in our Emancipation series. My name is Sylvia Paris-Drummond, and I am CEO at the Delmore Buddy Day Learning Institute. I would like to begin with our land and people acknowledgement. I would like to acknowledge that while we are not gathered together in person, we are connecting and learning together virtually in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship. These treaties were first signed by the Mi'kmaq and the Wolaski people with the British Crown in 1726. These territories did not surrender or transfer land to the British, but rather recognized Mi'kmaq title and set the rules for what was meant to be a long-standing relationship between nations, initially preventing both war and preventing interference with Indigenous rights to hunting, fishing, and agriculture, and facilitating trade. We are all treaty people, and as such, have responsibilities for each other and to this land. This territory is also the birthplace of African heritage and culture in this land that we now call Canada. Following the forcible displacement of people of African ancestry and descent, and the out-migration of Black loyalists from the United States, African Nova Scotians have shared their lands for over 400 years in Nova Scotia, and over 50 strong and resourceful African Nova Scotian communities exist here today. This is important to acknowledge, especially as we present this learning journey on responding to and addressing racism and impacts in the context of our Emancipation Day journey. I also want to introduce to you a bit about the project that this has been supported through under the auspices of the Nova Scotia Advisory Council on the Status of Women. This project, Together We Rise, is a 3-year initiative launched to address the systemic barriers Black women face in leadership. The project builds on the research, Concrete Ceilings, co-authored by Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard, our today's facilitator and program facilitator, which explores the lived experiences of Black women in Canada's public sector. As noted, we are honored to have Senator Bernard as our moderator. As the first African Nova Scotian woman appointed to the Senate, she brings decades of leadership in racial justice, equity, and mental health, and continues to be a powerful advocate for African Canadian communities. Welcome, Senator Bernard.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. Welcome to all of you. It's my honor today to be your moderator for the day. If you missed last week, I think you'll be able to pick it up on the DBDLI YouTube channel. Last week, we had Dr. Barb Hamilton-Hinch and 2 students, Coretta Beals and Summer Borden. I believe they're also your students, Dr. Munroe-Anderson. This week, we continue. So welcome to week 2 of Emancipate Your Mind, a virtual conversation series. Today, we are centering the voices, experiences, and legacies of African Nova Scotian women, women whose contributions to civil rights organizing in Halifax and across Canada have often been overlooked, yet remained very foundational to our collective struggle for justice. In my research, I've worked to counter the systemic erasure of Black women's history by chronicling the lives and community leadership of Black women. I'd like to name a few of the remarkable women who were at the heart of the civil rights movement, women who were change leaders, especially during the 1950s through the 1960s. Women whose voices and stories are often left out of discussions about the civil rights movement. So I'm thinking about people like Dr. Carrie Best, Dr. Pearline Oliver, and I won't name them all. If you have other names, pop them into the chat. Wilhelmina Jones, Joan Jones, Muriel States, and there are so many others. Others who worked quietly and diligently in their home communities, working in their churches, in their latest auxiliaries and women's missionary societies. I invite you to think about those women influencers. And as I said, please put their names in the chat. Their activism, organizing, and vision for justice challenged and do continue to challenge the dominant narratives, and they expand our understanding of what it means to build a movement. Their stories remind us that the fight for racial equality is not just historical, but it's ongoing, and it is deeply, deeply personal. So today, we have a conversation with a contemporary woman community leader in the person of Dr. Késa Munroe-Anderson. She is an associate professor at Acadia University in the School of Education. She's a recognized leader in Africentric, anti-racist, and Black feminist, womanist education. A two-time alumna of Acadia, she is the driving force behind the launch of Atlantic Canada's first Africentric Bachelor of Education program, which began in January of 2025. But we know the work to get us there started long before. Welcome, Dr. Késa Munroe-Anderson. With joining her on the panel today is one of her students, Charmaine Willis. Charmaine is a dedicated educator and community leader with over 20 years of experience in financial banking and more than a decade supporting African Nova Scotian students as a student support worker with the Halifax Regional Center for Education. She is currently enrolled at Acadia University's Africentric Bachelor of Education program as part of that cohort and will graduate in the spring of 2028. Also joining, Shalise Jordan, whose roots are in East Preston, Nova Scotia, my home community. Shalise is a University of Pennsylvania graduate with a background in biology, chemistry, and English. And she's currently interning in research computing and cybersecurity at a biotech company. She has held multiple roles across the biotech sector, and in September, she will begin her master's in translational research and applied medicine at Stanford University. You can find the full bios of these three outstanding individuals who have joined us today on the Eventbrite page. So please do that. So let me start by introducing the series. Whether we're students or professors, we are all navigating systems that were not built for us. Yet we continue to push forward. We cradle each other. We teach each other. We lift as we climb. That is the essence of She Who Learns Teaches, a philosophy rooted in collective empowerment and the passing of knowledge, care, and resistance. It is a call to action, to teach, to mentor, to mother the mind, and to build liberatory spaces where Black thought and Black life are not only included, but centered. And I keep thinking, if we don't do this work, who will? If we don't insist on generating and sustaining Black epistemologies, we risk allowing others to define our realities for us. We must not accept the myth that there is no research, no data, no history. We must continue to create, document, and teach from a place of love and liberation. And in an article I co-authored in 2000 titled, She Who Learns Teaches, my co-authors, all of whom were students at the time, and I wrote, and I quote, "Through pain, there is healing. Through struggle, there is triumph. Through oppression, there is emancipation." That line continues to resonate with me. It reminds us that emancipation is not just a historical event. It's a mindset. It is a process. It is a commitment to free ourselves intellectually, spiritually, and politically. It is a commitment to free ourselves. Let's begin this conversation in the spirit of those who came before us and in honor of those who are still learning, still teaching, and still leading the way. So we'll start with that basic conversation about Emancipation Day and emancipating our minds. We'll start with you, Dr. Munroe-Anderson. What does Emancipation Day mean to you, personally and professionally?
Good afternoon, Senator Bernard, my esteemed panelists, Charmaine and Shalise, Sylvia, Paris Drummond, DBDLI family, and all who are here with us today. And thank you all for this honor to speak on such an intriguing subject matter on emancipating our minds and from this perspective. So Emancipation Day is extremely important to me as a Black woman, as an Afro-Bahamian, as an African Canadian. It is important to me personally because of my African ancestry and the connection of my ancestors in the Bahamas, African peoples in Canada, across the diaspora, and the continent of Africa as well, to the Great Matha, the tragedy, the great tragedy of the enslavement of millions of African peoples across the period of centuries. So Emancipation Day is a day that I grew up acknowledging in the Bahamas. As a little girl and, throughout my teenagehood and early adulthood before moving to Nova Scotia. And it was the first Monday of August every year. We acknowledge this important day, remembering the scourge of enslavement of African peoples as real, as a dehumanizing and tragic historic fact that has negatively impacted the lives of people of African descent, not only in the Bahamas, but across the world and up to this present day. So for me, it's extremely important for us to have this significant day as a day of acknowledgement, remembering, considering the truth that slavery happened and that, it happened right here in Canada as well. We like to point our fingers to the United States and talk about enslavement there and consider ourselves as being the saviors because of, our connection to the Underground Railroad. And there's been a omission in our Canadian history due to that desire to silence that aspect of our history. And but we need to acknowledge what has happened and further to acknowledge the enormous contributions. Forced, yes, though, they happen through force. They happen through the dehumanization of African peoples being brought here, kidnapped and being brought here, many dying on or being killed on the journey, and abused in every way we can think of. But the truth of the matter is that the contributions to the economic and the infrastructural development of this country and the entirety of North America, South America, throughout the Caribbean must be acknowledged. We must speak to that. Then professionally, we must remember that. We must acknowledge that for all the reasons you spoke to, Senator Bernard, in the opening. Professionally, I have a deep connection to Emancipation Day in Nova Scotia because I was serving as Deputy Minister of Communities, Culture, and Heritage in 2021. And it was during that time, I was also, according to, because of my portfolio, the Office of African Nova Scotian Affairs the responsibility for that office fell under me as well in that position. And I remember the day that I was called into a meeting. Then it was Premier Ian Rankin, and one of his advisors called me and two other deputy ministers into a meeting, along with Minister Ince, who was the Minister of African Nova Scotian Affairs, Minister Tony Ince. And one of the other deputy ministers was Candace Thomas, who was Deputy Minister of Justice. And the other was Deputy Berlinger, who was an Indigenous woman. So Candace Thomas, of course, of East Preston, African Nova Scotian, and an Indigenous woman who was then serving as Deputy Minister of the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism. So it was the three of us. Imagine that. And I looked around that table and I thought, wow, this is history in the making. And the question that was posed to us is, what would be the risk? Because it had been brought to the attention of the Premier that we needed to acknowledge Emancipation Day. And Senator Bernard, I thank you for leading the charge at the federal level, because we had just acknowledged, we'd come to that point in our country where we were acknowledging Emancipation Day at the federal level. And so it only made sense that all provinces, territories should also acknowledge Emancipation Day. So I was there in the conversation, and one of us, Premier Rankin's advisors, Premier Rankin himself was not at the table, but one of his advisors posed to us the question, what would be the risk to us celebrating or acknowledging Emancipation Day? And I kind of looked sideways at him, and I said, I can't think of any risk to us acknowledging Emancipation Day. And I explained, I said, I am originally from the Bahamas, and I grew up in a very small island country, acknowledging Emancipation Day every year. And I found it quite strange, and I would say dehumanizing, to be in a country like Canada and for us to have not acknowledged this very real history that played a significant role in our history as a country. And so I said to him, I could tell you about the risks to us not acknowledging. We risk continuing the historic silencing of this very real occurrence in our history. So we risk being complicit to the silencing of the fact that the enslavement of African people did take place in Nova Scotia and in Canada. And to do this would be nullifying the very real historic and present day existence of anti-Black racism and its connection to the legacy of slavery. So I was beaming with pride when I found out that we were in fact moving forward with acknowledging Emancipation Day. I played a very important role leading the work with communities, culture, and heritage of connecting that acknowledgement with African Nova Scotian communities to ensure that African Nova Scotian communities had that opportunity through funding and just opportunities to lead and have voices centered, leading this conversation on the first Emancipation Day and setting the stage and setting the way forward for all Emancipation Days to come. So that's a moment I will never forget. And I feel very proud to have been able to sit in that seat at that time and play a role in making that decision, but also Deputy Candace Thomas and we actually wrote together the Emancipation Proclamation that, of course, was passed on to Minister Ince and the others for proclaiming the acknowledgement of the first Emancipation Day in Nova Scotia.
Dr. Késa, we can hear the excitement in your voice as you retell that story, and I hope you retell it over and over and over again. Interesting hearing that concept, that question, what's the risk? When I actually introduced the bill to have Emancipation Day recognized federally, one of my senator colleagues questioned and raised a question of risk, and the perspective was there was a risk that I was trying to rewrite history. And my position was very clear. This is not rewriting history. It's telling Canada's full history. And it's so important that we do that. Let's go now to our young voices, our student voices on this panel. Can you tell us, Shalise and Charmaine, what does Emancipation Day mean to you? And why don't we start with you, Shalise?
Hi, all. Once again, my name is Shalise. Thanks for having me. I'd say emancipation to me is not just about being freed from something. It's about becoming free within something. It's about loosening the grip of structures and expectations that have tried to tell me and people like me who we're allowed to be. And as a Black woman who's been in relatively elite academic spaces my entire career, from boarding school to a T30 to an Ivy League university to an
Shalise,
equivalent,
let me
yes.
stop you for a second. I see there's a note that the audio isn't good for you, and I think it might be the headphones.
Oh, do you want me to try without?
Please, yes. We want the audience to definitely hear everything you're saying.
Are you able to hear me better?
Is that better? Yes, I think so. Go ahead.
Okay, hello again. I will start over. So once again, I'm Shalise. Thanks for having me. And emancipation to me is not really about being freed from something. It's about becoming free within something. So loosening the grip of structures and expectations that have tried to tell me and people who look like me what and who we're allowed to be. As a Black woman in academic spaces, relatively elite ones, from boarding school to a T30 US institution to an Ivy League to an equivalent institution, I often feel both hyper-visible and invisible at the same time. And so emancipation to me is reclaiming the right to be complex in these spaces. It's walking into rooms and not asking to be made legible. It's resisting the performance of success that academia actually does demand of us, and choosing to show up in ways that protect my interior life and my cultural conditioning and my values, my pace, and ultimately my personhood. I didn't grow up thinking of emancipation as a day. I didn't learn about it when I was within the Canadian school system. And even now, as a Canadian who's lived most of my adult life in the US, I think my relationship to Black history often feels fragmented. And I think maybe that's the point. Emancipation for me means stitching myself back together on my own terms.
Wow, stitching myself back together. Love it. Charmaine?
Thank you, Senator Bernard, and the distinguished guests on the panel, and I thank you for this opportunity. So as I reflect, emancipation, and I'm thankful, Dr. Senator, for Bernard, for your force and your input and implementing and introducing this and very important day that should be reflected every day. It's acknowledging our ancestors of African descent, people across the world. I had the opportunity last year to visit the motherland, Ghana, Africa, and was blessed to be able to participate in Emancipation Day on August 1st with our group. And it was very humbling and a very emotional experience to see people that look like me, that we all come from different experiences, but we were, united as a people, being able to see the sisters and brothers express themselves and by dance, by music. Spirituality is very important in the continent. So it's important, and I'm glad that we are having this conversation because not a lot of people in Canada or Nova Scotia, and specifically our schools, do not know about Emancipation Day. So it's important in my role as an African support worker in the school, and that's where the cultural enrichment program comes into play, to be able to introduce these types of, the events and the history, rich history that we have to our students, so they're able to embrace and their identity and know where they come from. So it was a very emotional time well spent. It was this year, this week was the week that we left to go to Africa, which is an extraordinary experience. And the emancipation means a lot to different people, but I would encourage anyone to just get to, do some research, get to understand, the concept of Emancipation Day, the history, because it's a history for everyone to learn.
That's very powerful and really encouraging people to learn as much as they can. And I'm sure it was transformational to be in Ghana, to be in the motherland on Emancipation Day. I want to switch topics now and talk a bit about other mothering in the academy. Some people may refer to it as mentoring, but I think other mothering goes beyond mentorship. It's beyond mentorship. It's about resistance. It's about legacy building. It's about creating space for students who need to stitch themselves back up, right? It's love in action. So today, as we explore Black feminist mentorship, let's sort of think about those who have mothered our minds, those who have nurtured our spirits, those who have helped us imagine new possibilities, not only for ourselves, but also for our communities. And so it's in that spirit that I move the conversation now to invite us to talk a bit about the concept of other mothering. So Dr. Munroe-Anderson, I'd like to start with you again and ask, how has the concept of other mothering shown up in your own academic journey, either as someone who received it or as someone who's offering it?
Thank you. The concept of other mothering is critical to me, and it has shown up both as a real support and action throughout my life. When I reflect on my life as a girl growing up in the Bahamas, going through school and community, and coming to Nova Scotia as well. There have been so many different ways in which other mothering has shown up. So I've been blessed. I've had many other mothers in my life, and they've served as a bridge, through a Black feminist perspective. Other mothers aren't only building bridges, they actually serve as bridges. And they have served as door openers for me and others, opening the door for opportunity for other people's children. And so other mothering recognizes and validates the role that Black women, as Black women, have played in schools and communities and in post-secondary institutions, et cetera, and beyond, traditionally from a place of moral responsibility, displaying that ethic of caring, the ethic of personal accountability, our words lining up with our actions, theory lining up with practice into praxis. It's all connected to a Black feminist perspective that the purpose of education is for political liberation from the oppression of racism and all other forms of oppression. So this legacy of other mothering is a responsibility to care for and advocate for, seek out the best educational experience for children and students, not our own. And it's been passed on to me from my mother, who was a teacher for 50 years in the Bahamas in the P-12 system. And now I pass it on to my students, and especially African Nova Scotian and Black students, Indigenous students, and all students of color, through my everyday acts of resistance in my teaching at the B.Ed levels, the MEd levels by serving as an other mother to the students in the Equity and Social Justice Master of Education and Inclusive Education program that I lead those cohorts. And I started that with Dr. Lynn Ilwood in 2022. And then most recently, as you noted in my bio, Senator Bernard, the Africentric BED cohort. And also there's another group that I need to lift off the page, which we didn't plan this cohort, but it happened because of, I would say, this Black feminist way of leadership and knowing that we cannot leave anyone behind. So I call it the Africentric Pathways cohort. And I've been using that. I named it myself, and no one at Acadia has resisted it, so I continue to call it the Africentric Pathways cohort, because they are the other students who also applied, but they're still on their journey to attaining what they need according to the prerequisite requirements for the BEd program. And I believe from an Africentric and other mothering perspective, we don't leave anyone behind. In Black communities, Black women we don't shove people aside and discard folks. What we do, as you said at the beginning, we lift, we support, we provide nourishment and care for folks, and we help to find ways to provide for needs. So as coordinator of the Africentric BED cohort, I advocate for 11 African Nova Scotian BED students and those in the Pathways cohort. So there's up to 12 students who have participated in that cohort to allow them the opportunity to attain this undergraduate degree in an Afrocentric environment with an Afrocentric curriculum being taught by people who look like them with the lived experiences that they have, and the classroom environment, the pedagogy reflecting them. Then also in the Pathways program, providing that opportunity for students to attain science and math undergraduate courses, working with others in at Acadia University and the Delmore Buddy Day Learning Institute, our community partner, to ensure that these students are fully funded, because we recognize that through a Black feminist perspective, my anti-racist perspective, that it's not only, race there's an intersectional reality between racism and classism and sexism and all the other isms, and we must be mindful of breaking the chains, emancipating folks in real, tangible ways by providing financial support, transportation support as well. We provide a community meal when we meet on those full days. So we understand that there are so many ways that we are able to serve, and I've experienced other mothering, and I reciprocate. Reciprocity is an Afrocentric philosophy that I aim to embody in my work as an educator. So I just want to throw some names out of people who are other mothers to me, and then I'll end my remarks. So
Dr. Munroe-Anderson, we would love to hear those, but I'm a bit conscious of time.
Okay, all right.
Would you mind popping those names into the chat?
I will
That
do
okay?
that. Thank you.
Let me thank you so much. And it's so powerful. It's so powerful and empowering. So let me say to the audience, I'm going to come to you for some questions shortly. And then we'll come back to the panel. But before we go to the audience, so this gives you some time to get your questions ready for the panel. I want to ask Charmaine and Shalise if you if you could share with us an experience you may have had with mentorship in the form of that other mothering that Dr. Késa Munroe-Anderson talked about and highlighted. Other mothering that helps you to feel seen and heard and supported and even empowered in spaces that otherwise were feeling isolating. And I think, Shalise, you talked about being hyper visible and invisible. And so in those kinds of spaces, was there an experience of other mothering or mentorship that helped you? This time we'll start with Charmaine.
Thank you, Senator. Well, the form of mothering coming in being brought up in the Preston Township of East Preston, my grandmother, Miss Evelina Skier, along with my mother, Paulette Skier Slaughter, they were both my moms. I was brought up in a dual household. So, and there were also other community ladies, women in the community that were also mother figures to me. So that concept of mothering is very important, especially in our Black communities. That we have it takes a village to raise a child, and I take that with me through mothering of my children, the mothering of students in the school system. Many of them they say to me, Miss Willis, you're just like my mom. I'm here for you. I'm a huge advocate for our students, ensuring that they have the resources, the tools to be able to feel good about themselves, know who they are, that they can achieve. If they put their mind to anything, they can achieve. So I've seen myself attend basketball games after work. I'm supposed to be finished my shift, but one of my students are playing basketball, so I attend their basketball games to support and show them that I care, I love them, and I want to be that role model for the students and have them to know that they can flourish. So it's important, especially in our schools with the African support role, that the students see themselves and that they have that role model, whether it be mothering, father. We have, males, females in those roles. So it's very important because like Dr. Késa said, there's a lack of teachers in our system that, there are many in the system that don't have anyone that look like our students, racialized students. So I believe that mothering is important, and it gives that philosophy of it takes a village to raise a child.
Thank you so much. It takes a village. Let's go to you, Shalise, and I'm really interested in hearing from you because you haven't gone to post-secondary education in Nova Scotia. So what are some snippets from your experience? You're on mute.
Thank you for telling me.
That had to happen at least once today, right?
But yeah, that's true. I did my secondary education split between Victoria, BC and Oakville, Ontario. But I think even before the concept of other mothering can be addressed, I think it's actually prescient to address like what spaces would actually need to do in order for mentorship relationships like this to even be possible for minoritized students. And I think institutions would need to start from the assumption that we already belong, not as guests, not as optics, but as epistemic contributors. And this means resourcing our ideas without forcing them to mirror dominant frameworks. It means hiring faculty who can teach our histories without flattering themselves or the institution, and support research agendas that don't need to apologize for being grounded in community or in resistance. It means listening to what Black students aren't saying out loud, like why we disappear from certain majors, avoid certain advisors, or stop speaking in seminar. It means our silence not as disengagement, but as a signal that something is structurally off. And beyond the classroom, centering us looks like reshaping mental health services, mentorship programs, and even physical spaces to reflect our actual needs, not just as an offering of diversity measures, but about making the institution bend toward us, not the other way around. So what this has looked like for me in these various spaces, because I'm difficult. I'm difficult for lots of reasons, and some of this is on purpose and some of it is not. So I've always had a really horrible time in all of these institutions. They weren't meant to support me, people like me, or my success. I've never been to a school in my adult life that's more than 4% Black. we are not well represented, and these elite institutions are also inherently at odds with the communities in which they're they're situated. Like the idea that we don't belong and our lack of representation, after a while, things like stereotype threat and imposter phenomenon seep in, because you stop believing or start believing that the reason you're not represented is because you're inadequate, as opposed to because you're not being recruited fairly, you're not being supported fairly. And I think the only reason I've been okay in these spaces is, I think, one, I'm very vindictive as a person. I will be successful in spite of. But I've had nurses who saw that I was losing my mind and stepped in for me. I've had therapists. I've had professors go to bat for me. I've had professors take me out of situations that have put me in precarious situations. And ultimately, like, what qualified people, especially qualified people, require, it's not to be molded, it's to be scaffolded by people who are willing to let us shape our lives for ourselves.
Shalise, I think I wouldn't call that being vindictive. I call it resilience and self-empowerment. And good on you. It's surviving against the odds. And the people you've identified are certainly people who've stepped in and filled in the gap. And for me, that's what other mothering is about. It certainly has been the journey that I've been on. So we'll go now to see if there's some questions from the audience. And I think, Magda, you're doing it today?
Yes. Currently, we do not have any questions, neither in the chat or in the Q&A section.
Oh,
So-
okay. Okay, why don't I go to the next set of questions, and maybe you could keep monitoring the space to see if any other questions come.
Absolutely.
So the time has just gone really quickly. Oh, wait a second. I think I may have mixed up the time. I did. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So let's blame that on me juggling a lot of things. I was thinking we were finishing at 1, but we actually go until 1:30. So let's, okay, so let me do a little self-talk. Senator Wanda, settle yourself down. Be present in the moment, and let's hear more from our panel. So I'd like to talk a bit about Black feminist mentorship and move our conversation to that space for a moment. So I want to start by talking a bit about Ubuntu. Dr. Munroe-Anderson, you've integrated Ubuntu into the Africentric Bachelor of Education program. And that certainly speaks to collective care, it speaks to shared success. How do you see Ubuntu aligning with your understanding of Black feminist mentorship in the academy, or other mothering in the academy? And how do you see it operating in the classroom, but also in the community? How do you see it showing up in those spaces?
Thank you, Senator. So from my perspective, the values of Ubuntu, which include the spirit of solidarity, compassion, respect, dignity, and survival, they are all integrated into and reflected in Black feminist mentorship in academia and beyond through the tenet of that moral obligation from within that defines Black feminist leadership, particularly in education, as those of us who work towards the uplift of the community. I really like that theme, Together We Rise. And also, it is also reflective of the 52nd independence of the Bahamas theme is the same thing this year, Together We Rise. And so I think about even growing up, always hearing about the importance of lifting one another up. But for Black feminism and this work, it centers the knowledge, it centers the advocacy, the lives, the values of Black women, as we've been talking about, but it doesn't exclude support for all. It includes all in the community, which is an Ubuntu concept. So we aim to work together for the betterment of everyone in our communities, our children, our youth, our elders, our young adults, and we work with and not against Black men, which, you know, makes Black feminism different from other forms of feminism in terms of it being more community focused, being focused on Black women. And, you know, as we've been talking about, Black women uphold Black communities and communities in general. So Black feminism is a critical theory with the aim of fighting oppression of Black women and all people. We resist domination and oppression, calling on our own experiences, our own oppression to fuel our work. And so through that understanding and worldview of Ubuntu, that my humanity is connected to your humanity. My success is dependent upon your success. I am because you are. I am, you know, a person is only a person through other people. I work towards attaining equity in education because that will be empowering to the entire community. So Black feminism is community-centered and community-minded and not individualistic, and it exemplifies Ubuntu. And I've seen this lived out every time we've gathered as an Africentric BED cohort family. And I call what we have a family because that is the way it is. And it's beyond simply a group of Black students gathering with Black professors, you know, to either to plan, to develop, to deliver, to teach courses towards a BED. No, we are a family. We are family. In the ABC, there is actually no separation from my experience between community and classroom. Our classroom is a community, and we are bringing community to the classroom. So we've literally had classes in African Nova Scotian communities in Gibson Woods and Upper Hammonds Plains in the North End at DBDLI, but I'm talking more than a physical location. I'm talking about a sense of being, of embracing who we are as African people and supporting one another through this program. And there's mutual accountability, there's reciprocity, respect for each other's lived experiences. And one of the ways I see this lived out is the fact that we have all people of African descent, all 11, but there is diversity within this community because we have 7 African Nova Scotians. We have others who are one of the Sudan, South Sudan, 2 students who are from Jamaica originally, and another student from St. Kitts and Nevis. And I can tell you, you would not know that we are family. And that is what Ubuntu tells us. We must be working together because we have a common unity and we have a common goal and a purpose. And this is about emancipating our minds and working together for the benefit of those educators, of those students and communities to come when these folks complete their program and they move out into community. So there's so much more I could say about that, but I'm going to wrap it up there.
That's so powerful and so empowering to hear this whole idea of community, bringing community into our academic spaces, but also taking those academic spaces into community, not just physically, but mentally. You know, how do we do that? How do we, create those kind of opportunities? And it's through that common goal, that common purpose. And essentially that common purpose for many of us is uplifting the race, isn't it? And how we do that. Let's hear from Shalise and Charmaine on the Black Feminist Mentorship. So many people describe it, pardon me, as legacy work, as passing on knowledge, as nurturing leadership. And as Dr. Késa has just highlighted, it's about building and sharing community resilience and what we learn from community resilience. So as younger people in this work, what legacy do you hope to leave through your work, through your the things that you feel passionate about? What will your legacy be? So if we're having a conversation, 30 years from now, what would we be saying about Charmaine Willis? We'll have you start. And Shalise Crawley-Jordan. What would we have? What would we be hearing? Charmaine, you start this one.
Thank you, Senator. So I would want my students and others in the community to know, as you know, I'm a lifelong learner. I went back to school when I was 51 years old. So a lot of folks may, shy away from, higher learning, getting a higher education at a later age. But, I find it empowering, and I love to learn different things. And in the education system, the strength that you can provide to the students and the mentorship and the role modeling, that is all in Ubuntu, right? It's funny because I'm taking a course at Mount St. Vincent right now on women and aging and the different intersectional areas that may limit women. So I just find it very interesting. We talk about race, we talk about age, we talk about mental health. So I want the community, youth, elders to know that, if you put your mind to higher learning, you can achieve it. There's no limit to learning. So, that's the legacy I want to be able to leave with others, to continue to learn about yourself, learn about your culture, learn about the community, learn about the world, the different events, everything that is happening, and just embrace the journey of learning.
That's so powerful when I think about that whole idea of lifelong learning and how important that is. And so many of our ancestors never had the opportunity to learn. That was something that was denied them. So taking the opportunity now and running with it, no matter what age you are, I think that's very powerful. Shalise, what's your legacy going to be?
So I'm not so sure about 30 years from now. I'm not even sure about 5 years from now. And I don't work in education, but I do live in it. And through my life in academia, I want my legacy to be this, and that's making room for complexity. Like, I want young Black women, but also young Black people in general, because we're grossly underrepresented in all of these spaces. 4% of all scientists are Black, and even less of those are women. But to not have to feel like you have to perform certainty or even shrink your ambition to be able to survive in these spaces. I want to leave behind a trail of questions, of provocations and refusals that remind others that they're allowed to challenge, to change, and to choose their own pace. And I want to normalize being both brilliant and uncertain, to make space for those of us who aren't always charismatic, who aren't always polished, but who are rigorous in our thinking and gentle in our presence. My legacy isn't about making things easier, but making them truer. And that's what builds resilience. It's not surviving the institution, but reshaping it so that others don't have to survive the same way.
I believe you're doing that, reshaping every space you enter. I can see the passion. Dr. Késa, what would your legacy be?
I would want to be known as someone who opened doors for others, who served as a bridge and as an other mother for people of African descent and for all of my students, racialized students particularly, because in my role within the School of Education, I see a tremendous underrepresentation of racialized students in general in the Bachelor of Education program. and specifically Black and African Nova Scotian and Indigenous students represented in that program. And I wanted to be said that Dr. Késa Munroe-Anderson did something about that. When we look at the P to 12 system in years to come, that folks will be able to say, she came, she used her voice, she used the power that she had from her positions, her positionality. She even used her non-privileged identities to advocate for, to work towards transformative change, and we see it. And I want my grandchildren and my other mother grandchildren to be able to say, we are grateful that she lived, that she made a difference, and that our lives are better because of it. The lives of African Nova Scotians, Black people, racialized people, and all people, because again, Ubuntu. We are connected. All people, we are connected. And I think if we could live in that way, and if we thought of ourselves as connected in that way, I think we would live differently, and we would have less oppression. We would be able to overcome these historic, really egregious acts of dehumanization that we continue to grapple with in 2025. We are brilliant. Humans are brilliant people. Black people are brilliant people. And I feel that there needs to be space for the brilliance of all people to shine, and that there needs to be space for all of these contributions. And I would like that to be my legacy, that I have been a person who worked towards and attained transformative change, particularly in education.
You're certainly working towards that. And as you do, as you continue to build, you've reminded us earlier that you've experienced mentorship and other mothering. And I thought we were ending at 12. I'm sorry, at 1. And so I said, in the interest of time, put it in the chat. I'm going to invite you now to take it out of the chat and to speak aloud the names of the shoulders that you're standing on to continue the legacy building that you're doing here and now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Senator. So I spoke to my mother's influence, but again, other mothers are those who have no real, they have no responsibility except for they have this innate and community responsibility and obligation to support other people's children. Mrs. Evelyn Pinderdames was a teacher who did not actually teach me in a class in high school. I was in her homeroom, and when my mom, my family, they were moving from one island to another, and I was going to be finishing my last year of high school, my mother left me to live with this woman and her husband and family. And they changed my life. And it was because of her husband, actually, that I ended up at Acadia University, because he is an Acadia alum. And so they nurtured me as if, and I am family. We became family, and I was able to return the favor with their children when they became old enough to come to university, and 2 of them have come to Nova Scotia. And then there was Miss Daisy McPhee, who was a vice principal, who my mother also said when she was leaving, Miss Daisy, could you look after my daughter for me, please? And she certainly did. Then going through, arriving in Nova Scotia permanently, living in Nova Scotia, having children, African Nova Scotian children, and always knowing that I would pursue a PhD program, but having everything change for me towards education as I became more aware of the state of the historical and contemporary conditions of African Nova Scotians because of systemic anti-Black racism. And automatically my trajectory changed. It shifted towards education. And I was given the opportunity to be a student in the Master of Education, the first Africentric cohort focused on Africentric leadership. Senator Bernard, you were one of my instructors for the practicum, particularly as Dr. Susan Brigham was the coordinator. And that experience shifted me closer to where I needed to be, where I believe I have been called to education for this time, for this generation, the generations to come, to make changes. And so I'm grateful to Dr. Susie Brigham, who became my supervisor for the PhD program, and who supported me throughout that process when there were many obstacles that were placed in my way that I had to overcome. But because she had a sure, steady, and she was a voice of wisdom as well. And she encouraged me all the time. Many times I wanted to give up, but she encouraged me and supported me. She opened doors for me to teach while I was a student as well. And she continued to encourage me, as you did, Senator Bernard, even with opportunities for teaching. You know, you would call me or text me and say, "Did you consider this? Did you think about that?" And there's one more person I want to lift off the page, and that's Her Honor, Mayanne Francis. And she has also been, and Senator Bernard, you know, probably heard me say this before. I consider both you and Dr. Francis my big sisters. I'm the eldest in my family, and I never had big sisters, and I always wanted them. So there's a dual role that I find that you have played in my life, both as other mother, but also a big sister, in you know, always again encouraging, affirming. As Black women, we do need the affirmation because, as Shalice mentioned, we are in these spaces where we are alone, and we are being told. Most people are telling us that we can't, why we can't do it. And so we need folks like you to continue to speak. And I serve that role as well for others to say, of course you can. It's been done by our mothers for centuries. Our ancestors have done it, and you can too. So those are the women that I appreciate having the opportunity to speak their names into the atmosphere today.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad we had time to revert. I think we do have some questions now from our audience. So Magda.
Yes, we do. The first one is from Robin. Sorry, I lost the question in the chat. The question is, how did Dr. Anderson coordinate having classes not within the Acadia, but within community? And was there a policy that presented as a barrier?
Thank you. Great question. There were no policies presented that presented barriers. In fact, Acadia University has classes in other spaces, other classes outside of particular programs. For instance, I've taught Acadia classes at the Mount. And I know we've had opportunities where we've taught in the South Shore, for example. And so there were no barriers. You know what? And I kind of, you know, I didn't ask permission. I just said, this is what we're doing. We said that we would host this program. We provided a proposal. We situated the proposal on the philosophies of Africentricity and Ubuntu. And there is no way we could activate that and activate those and live up to what we said we were going to do in that proposal while remaining within the four walls of Acadia University. And so we did it. We organized it. And, you know, the students, I remember I had a class in Upper Hammonds Plains in the building that used to be the one-room schoolhouse. It's now the Upper Hammonds Plains Community Center. And we had elders who came to that space and a youth, and we had an elder circle. They shared their experience in the one-room schoolhouse and in segregated schools in general in that community. And it was an amazing, wonderful, amazing day on the 22nd of January of this February, sorry, of this year. And I had students saying to me afterwards, we had someone from community provide the catering, and students came to me and said, "Can we come here every day for our class? Can we just stay here?" Because we felt community, we were in community, and community is us. So we need, Afrocentricity is about us centering who we are in all of what we're doing and in analysis of who we are as Black people. And so I think there sometimes we may put barriers on ourselves that don't exist. So I encourage you all of you listening, to just say, this is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it, and just do it.
That's often the approach I would use as well. Thank you. Magda, any other questions in the chat?
Yes. What strategies can be implemented to recognize and validate other mothering as legitimate academic labor? Because many times Black women's labor is invisible.
I'll
Can I
tell you
answer
what I
this one?
did. Oh, yes, please, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. I noticed lots of interesting things are happening in the chat. And one of them is the quote that education is the most powerful weapon we can choose to change the world. And also seeing what Dr. Késa just said, I actually kind of want to rebut both of these things to some extent, because I think at a certain point, education is a distraction. I know because I've done all the right things, all the right ways. And actually, I now have big fish, little pond syndrome, which is essentially like when you can choose to go to bigger and better opportunities, and there you just become one of many high achievers, and your performance and your access to things suffers because your deprivation is relative. So even if you're doing really well technically, if your peers are doing better, you'll say, like, I'm failing at life. And now that I've been in these spaces, I know that having an education and having a credential and receiving an institutional mark of approval doesn't mean anything to the people who intended to discredit you anyway. Like there are rooms you can walk into where none of these things matter. Example, I don't know if you're aware of the movie and the book Just Mercy, but Brian Stevenson has a brother who was Penn faculty in the psychology department, and he's been Penn faculty for 20 years, and not one of his peers has read his work. So like at a certain point, I think you can do the thing without an education, because so much of education is learning as you go. And the question of what strategies can be implemented to recognize and validate other mothering as legitimate academic labor, I think is tough and multifaceted for a myriad of reasons. So the first of which is ultimately the things that we're feeling are structural. Like these are not just feelings of being empowered. Everything is designed. There are things in place to make certain people feel like themselves and their experiences are centered, and other people are meant to feel the opposite. And sometimes I don't think willpower actually gets you past that. In order to validate other mothering as legitimate academic labor, I think we need a patriarchal redefinition of what is labor in the first place, because so many of women's emotional tasks are already categorized as loving as opposed to as labor. So to even get to the academic part, we need to redecide as a society what labor looks like and who should be allowed to reap the benefits of their own labor.
Could I speak to that as well, please? Thank you so much,
Yes,
Shalise.
go ahead.
I agree that education is certainly more than the formal sense of education. We were being educated before we were allowed into these formal educational spaces. But I do believe in self-determination and not depending on someone else to validate who I am, that we need to validate ourselves. And I think that is critical. And so for me, because I am doing this work, and it is true that our work is often overlooked, but I don't allow folks to do that. You know what? Know how I validate myself? I write it. I write it. There's a career development report every year, the same time every year. And I created a new section. They've created their form. Well, I recreated the form. And I start my career development report now with talking about who I am as a Black woman in academia and how that's very different from 99.999% of my colleagues. And I provide that information to say, when you read the rest of this report, you need to read it through this lens. And so I speak to and I state overtly that as a Black woman, our history tells us that in academia, much of our work is overlooked, is invalidated. I state that overtly. I don't leave it up to imagination and for them to figure it out. We can't do that. I state it overtly. And I say, and because of that, you need to read this report through a different lens. So that's how I start my report every year. And I write it myself. I hold the pen. I'm writing my own story. Because again, until we have our own historians and we take on the role and identify ourselves as those writing and determining our history, naming ourselves instead of waiting to be named by others, we will forever be waiting on them to legitimize us. We won't ever be legitimate. And so that is what I do, so that the tale of the hunt does not continue to glorify the hunter. And you can call me, you may be seeing through rainbow vision glasses, but I'm hopeful and I've seen it work for me. I'm not saying that I'm not doing more work than others. I'm not saying that. It is real. It is a reality that we are doing work that others are not doing. But what I'm saying is I'm validating myself. I'm writing it down through these reports and through also writing articles, writing books and chapters. I wrote a book about, hopefully I will write a book soon, but I wrote a chapter about the AUBA, maternal activism and other mothering of the Ladies Auxiliary and the Women's Institute, the AUBA seen through the perspective of other mothering, because the truth of the matter is, even in our Black communities, we deal with patriarchy, and we need to call that out as well. And we need to speak to the fact that even within the AUBA, most of the membership are women, but we are fewer of the named leaders, and how that impacts upon how we are received and how we are validated. So I agree with you, Shalice. We have a lot of work to do, but I also believe that we can take the pen in our own hands and write our own story as well.
I want to just jump in just to share a couple of things that I've done. And I just invite you to think, if you will, about what things were like in the academy in 1990 when Wanda Thomas Bernard entered Dalhousie University as the first African Nova Scotian in a tenure track position. There was no roadmap, absolutely no roadmap, and barriers that you couldn't even begin to imagine some of what I had to deal with over the years. But some of the things that I did to try to create structural change didn't benefit me necessarily, but benefited other people who came along after me. And so challenging tenure and promotion processes and really pushing the university to see this work, other mothering, community work, community engagement, seeing that as part of what we do. And then guess what? The president of the university invited me to come and do a talk on engaging community in our work that I had been doing for 20 years. Like, it took them 20 years to recognize it, that's something. And now, guess what? Tenure and promotion processes now expect that community engagement, and funding bodies require you to have a community connection when you apply for research. So I feel like I've gone down a bit of a rabbit hole, but just to say this, these institutions weren't built for us, by us, but the power of education to be transformative. But it's the formal and informal education. And when I think about, my sister and my cousin and I, we were the first people from our community to even go to university. And part of the work that we had to do in those early years, I say my first degree, I was doing 2 degrees at the same time, because I was doing my degree at Mount St. Vincent University, but I was also doing my community-based degree, quote unquote, in social justice, in human rights. I was a student of Rocky Jones and Joan Jones in Kawacha House. The work that they were doing to teach about civil rights, to teach us about our history that we weren't getting in any textbook anywhere. And so engaging in that work. So I always say my first degree was on 2 tracks. One was that bachelor's degree, but the other was the civil rights activism degree that I got from community. Anyway, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to go off on the tangent, but you just sort of triggered a memory that was just so powerful. We'll take one more question. And I know Shalise has to leave very shortly. So if there's a question for Shalise, if we could put that up first.
Nothing specific for Shalise, just general question. Many of us do not have access to Black women mentors in academic or professional spaces. So what are some of the tangible tools or practices you all have used and would recommend for supporting our well-being, growth, and sense of belonging, both inside and outside these environments? And then
I'm sorry.
We also have a lot of comments, Senator, saying that you have been a mentor and a other mother and a role model for many people in the chat.
Thank you. Shalise, why don't you answer that question first? Let's hear from you on that one.
I think that question is so tough. But I also think our skills as people, whether that's soft or hard skills, actually are transferable. And I think for now, until we are adequately represented, this looks like finding mentors that are not in fields that look like yours. I've worked at 5 biotech companies. I've done a research fellowship. I've been in 2 institutions, and not once have I met a Black female scientist. Not one time. So if we are waiting for someone who looks like us, that day may never come. And it's not about aptitude, it's not about ability, it's that we are not taught which spaces we're allowed to occupy. We are not taught all of the opportunities that actually are available to us. And until there are people who look like us in these spaces, if we want to be mentored, if we want to be held, if we want to be supported, we need to be willing to look outwards.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that certainly was my experience as well. Anyone else want to speak to that?
I'll just add to that, role models in the education field. I have family in the Preston, East Preston, the Glasgows. When I used to work in this at a particular school, this particular individual would come in and substitute, and she encouraged me to go higher in education and consider teaching. So those types of role models and that encouragement is very important to share, and to share with my students as well, to be able to empower them to strive for success or attain higher learning after high school. There's other educators in the system. Karen Hudson is a mentor to me, as well as Dr. Késa in this Africentric cohort. So those are the types of individuals that you connect with, and have those collective relationships to be able to identify, your challenges and opportunities to grow.
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you for your words of wisdom, for your voices, for lending your voice to this topic, speaking truth to power. I want to thank you. I want to wrap up by sharing with you the voices of 2 students, 2 social work students, who I think speak very powerfully to what can be in our spaces. The student writes, I will begin this reflection by acknowledging the influence this course has had on me in my continuing my path of learning and unlearning. Last semester, I began to question if I made the right decision to return to school. I had to ask myself if a degree in social work was worth the amount of anxiety, discomfort, and isolation I felt every time I entered a classroom. I was extremely close to giving up. But then I entered a space where my identity was placed at the center, and my spirit began to revitalize. That was a student in one of my classes, and here's another student. The student writes, "Firstly, I want to start by thanking you, Professor Dr. Wanda Thomas Bernard, because of how healing this class was for me. I found it very difficult to speak my truth in white-dominated spaces. However, you made it very easy to speak on Africentric worldviews, and I feel I've learned a plethora of things from this course. I wish I had you in more social work classes because of the safe environment you lead for Black students to share. This course opened my eyes to the kind of social worker I aspire to be. I now see myself as a tree that has grown new branches and leaves, nurtured by the knowledge and care you've provided." And the student goes on, and I could go on, but I want to end our time today with a little poem that I wrote. She who learns teaches. She enters lecture halls like sunrise, every question a doorway, creating brave spaces for all to rise. By candlelight, she learns, then passes the flame. You take hold of the power, then do the same. The student becomes the teacher, and she too passes the flame. She who learns teaches, and in her wake, legends begin to bloom. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us today. It's been an empowering and inspiring conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
This has been truly inspiring to be here, to be in conversation with all of you today. And healing.
Yes, Kate said in the chat, I've spent my life in dominant white spaces. These workshops continue to heal parts of my soul and mend my spirit. Thank you. And there's many more messages like that.
Can you capture those messages from the chat for us?
Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you.
It's really important for us to have these spaces where we can be honest about our lived experiences as Black women, and particularly Black women connected to academia, because those spaces are harmful. Like was said a number of times, they were not designed for us. In fact, they inflict spirit injury. And we need to have spaces that if we can build them within these institutions, we have the agency to build them outside of the institutions for sure. But we need to find those spaces where we can heal ourselves. Yes.
I hope this series becomes one of those spaces. And I'd been thinking about this theme, Emancipate Your Mind, since last year's Emancipation Day. Just the idea came to me. So I'm just very grateful to the Together We Rise team for doing this, because I think it's really, really important that we engage people in the conversations. So I don't know if you know how many people we had today, Magda.
Yes, we had 51 people today, and last week we had 53.
So I had a text from at least one person who said they had trouble with the link today.
Oh, that's too unfortunate.
Yes.
If you give me their name, I'll follow up. but we're also going to post all of these on YouTube.
Yes.
So people will be able to engage with it online that way.
And some people reached out to me last week to ask, they'd missed or had to leave early, and they wondered when the YouTube would be available, and I forgot to ask about that.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to work with the DBDLI tech team to get it posted this week, hopefully.
Oh, good, good. So we might
So,
have the
yes.
two posted. Okay.
And then we have everyone's emails that registered. So
Okay.
we can email the link out to everyone that way, so they'll know once it's posted.
Yes. Oh, I forgot to remind people to come next week. We'll send out a reminder. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you for allowing us to use our voices in this capacity and to be able to share our stories, because that's what it's all about, sharing our stories, our experience, our lived experiences, and being able to, add